to introduce you to perhaps one of the most brilliant shows done at the museum recently, Mutant Materials in Contemporary Design by my colleague Paola Antonelli, which reminds us that in fact, if I talk again about the Museum of Modern Art, as Glenn did, it's not only because we're obsessed with the place that we work, but because the institution in which we work has been for 80 years a continual laboratory on what it means to be modern and contemporary. And it is something that is reinterpreted on a almost daily basis. I think we could say that just as, in a sense, in the late Middle Ages, Korea invented a program for itself as a nation with its language. So Alfred Barr, and I'll go over this quickly because Glenn has talked about this history, but Alfred Barr invented a kind of language and mission for the Museum of Modern Art. And it was one that resonates with the title of today's Super Talks, the idea of innovation. For Alfred Barr in these complex diagrams, which are inventions of an institution, but also invention of an attitude about how an institution can continually try to capture what is contemporary. His rather impossible images here of art as a kind of torpedo, always moving forward, getting smaller in the back of what the museum would pay attention to, but a museum that was always aware of the immediate past, even as it torpedoed its trajectory ever forward into an evolving present. This is one of the most complex eye charts. All art historians need to prove that they don't need glasses by being able to follow this chart of bars. But I bring it up here, it's from 1936, because what it showed was that right around the time that the museum was being invented in the late 1920s, Barr and his colleagues felt that architecture had come to a place of unity as a modern expression and could take a role inside the museum. Glenn mentioned the Bauhaus as an inspiration for that, but it was a radical act to think in 1932 with the inaugural show, the international style show, as it's commonly called here in one room, the Corbusier room shown, that architecture could take a place in the gallery, and that rather than the gallery as being a place that would actually deaden architecture or render it a part of history, that it would render that architecture contemporary and in a dialogue with a whole new public. This was an enormous challenge, and it's one I want to show you in a few examples, is one that we work with daily. It was one that Philip Johnson, one of the curators of the 1932 inaugural architectural exhibition, took up again 2 years later in his now seminal and famous machine art exhibition of 1934. That's the one that you see here on the right. On the left, another view of the 1932 show with the Bauhaus building once again. So you can see that relationship to the idea that all of the expressions of modern culture could be brought into the museum, but not randomly. Always brought in with the notion of a relationship of innovation between technique and aesthetics. And I think this is very important to keep in mind, since our topic today is the nature of innovation in the realm of artistic expression. Philip Johnson's radical act in 1932 was to bring machine parts, airplane propellers, springs, and show them as works of art. The idea was actually to make it possible for visitors to the museum to see the daily world, the quotidian world, in a completely different perspective. It was an act of actually changing vision and cognition, not only within the museum, but outside in relationship to the world. So not only was innovation itself celebrated, but the medium of the exhibition was innovated upon and became a continual laboratory for innovation. The important thing here is these machine parts were not brought in as they might be in a science museum. They were not celebrated for the technical innovation. This is the latest Model T. This is a car that's better than the one before because it gets better gas mileage, but rather as aesthetic objects. So the relationship between technical invention and aesthetics was key from the first. It was an attack, in fact, on what Barr and others saw as facile styling in the so-called streamlining movement. So it was not, these were objects that would not be allowed into the museum because it was thought there was a poor relationship between technical innovation and styling. A desire was wanted for a complete intimate relationship always between function and form, And this developing of public taste then moved into something I think is very resonant with the activities of HundeCard, and that is the development of public taste about objects in the market, the good design exhibitions in the mid-century. Architecture was celebrated, therefore, as both an art, but one that was based on the technical innovations. This is Mies van der Rohe's Tugendhat House or Corbusier's Savoy House, but also as something that used technical innovation, let's say the use of new materials, to create entirely novel spaces, an entirely different experience of an architecture of the free plan and open spaces. Oops, you can see I'm technically challenged. I'm going to skip over those. And I want to then just use those few historical notes as a background for where we are now. When I go home next week, my first job is going to be to fine-tune the installation of a collection of recent acquisitions in the architecture realm called Building Collections. And I just wanted to show you some of the works that will be in that show that have been selected by myself and my colleagues in the last year or so to be parts of the permanent collection. So we're the gatekeepers to this collection, two architectural objects, and both of them cutting edge technologically. Sauerbruch and Hutton's GSW Tower here on the left in Berlin, and the model of Tom Main, American architect's extraordinary new tower called La Phare, the beacon at La Défense in Paris. Both of them incredibly technically innovative in their relationship to environmental control, in their use of new materials for sustainability, in their use of computer to calculate whether it be wind ventilation or in this case literally to calculate the form of the building in relationship to wind forces and the like using parametric design. They continue a tradition that is celebrated in our Mies objects, so that I think that when we exhibit them in a museum that holds Mies's early visionary projects of the skyscraper, both ends of the skyscraper history will be seen differently. As Glenn said, each time an object is added to the collection, history itself is rewritten. These are two Korean works that we're very proud to have just brought into the collection. The first work by the extraordinary young generation that's emerging in Korea now, exploring subjects of the modern movement, but in relationship to place. This is a house by the master Sung outside of Seoul, and this is the extraordinary double house by the architect Young Kim at Paju Book City. Both of those will be part of this exhibition. So the Berlin Tower, which transformed the city in a dialogue with history, but also evolved a first standard of a completely unair-conditioned, sustainable building through design innovation, through shape, something carried to even greater heights here in Tom Main's building now under construction in Paris. This is, to my mind, fascinating because we're in a world in which the computer provides 1,000 opportunities. And we at MoMA could literally spend our time opening the doors to every formal innovation that the computer can spew out. We have seen at art biennials architects exploring parametric design. This is an example by Randa Lash with Matthew Ritchie. Incredible to behold, a work of art to be sure, but to my mind not a work of architecture. It doesn't actually ask anything about program or technique or the like. I'm much more interested, to be polemical, in something that takes exactly those same innovative capacities of parametric design to take the skyscraper to a new urban and technical and aesthetic form. So I just conclude with some views of the Glenn saved me time because he talked about these exhibitions, the way I have tried to continue to think of the exhibition itself as a laboratory for changing the view of visitors to the museum to architecture in its constant search for a balance between innovation on both the technical and the aesthetic plane. So bringing a full-scale building into the museum, as we did with home delivery in 2008, was not something without precedent. It was, in a sense, a homage to the houses that had been erected in the museum garden. And I'm going to finish up with this. And just one example, and then I'll skip ahead to show you an exhibition we've just closed. And that is this energy cultivating house that was part of the home delivery exhibition, a beautiful example of taking the transparency of new materials, but those are new materials that, unlike glass with Mies van der Rohe, are actually plastics and resins that cultivate energy so that the house is a completely self-sustaining one that produces all of its own electricity. So these are the slides from the home delivery exhibition, but as my time is out, I just want to show you one last project that we've undertaken. And this, I think, pushes the idea of the museum as a laboratory for invention even to a new plane. Up until now, the museum has largely been content to show work that exists. And so it should, as it reaches out to grasp the extraordinary creativity in the world. But with the exhibition that we just closed called Rising Currents, Projects for New York's Waterfront, we asked 5 teams of architects, landscape designers, and engineers to imagine ways to make New York City more resilient for sea level rise in the coming decades. And they produced a series of innovative projects for New York which have electrified the public, but more importantly than that, they have also gathered the attention of our public officials, so that the new city planning documents that were released just a few weeks ago incorporate specific references to these designs at the Museum of Modern Art. And I think that in a certain way shows the power of the exhibition to not only innovate, but to open eyes from public officials to the general public, to a whole realm of activity that one could scarcely imagine would enter into a Museum of Modern Art. Who would imagine that the Museum of Modern Art would become a potent laboratory for thinking about how design can prepare us for the challenges of climate change? I wish I had another 20 minutes to detail what was in this exhibition, but I simply want, by showing you it post-mortem, it came down 5 days ago, to suggest that we're in a kind of innovative interaction in thinking about the museum and the exhibition. Not only what it shows is innovative, but the technique of the exhibition itself is meant to enhance and resonate with that innovation. Thank you very much.